What's goody, everybody? Welcome back. It's your boy Wilder42K, and we got another banger video for you today. The sports docuseries have been taken off recently, and I just want to thank you all, and we're going to keep that boat on and moving. This week, we hop to the MLB to talk about the most cursed franchise in all of sports, the Chicago Cubs. The Cubs started out as a great baseball team founded in 1876 as the Chicago White Stockings, where they joined the National League and became one of the early powerhouses, finishing first in the league 6 times in 11 years. In 1902, the moniker Cubs came along as a reference to the team's roster being so young, and it stuck, with the team officially adopting the name in 1907, while in 1906, the Cubs set the record for the most wins and highest winning percentage in MLB at 116 wins, which held up for nearly 100 years until 2001. However, in 1906, they did lose the World Series to the hitless wonders, the Chicago White Sox, their crosstown rivals. 1907, the first year being named the Cubs won 107 games and won their first franchise World Series in a 4-game sweep over Ty Cobb and the Detroit Tigers. Their pitching staff holding a sub 2.00 ERA throughout the season and only allowing 6 runs throughout the entire World Series. The Cubs eventually went back-to-back, winning another World Series in 1908. Their second chip came quick, but the same can't be said about the third. Fast forward to 1910, the Cubs had won their 4th NL pennant in 5 years, but lost another World Series to the Athletics, eventually slumping to the bottom of the league, and in 1916, new ownership moved the Cubs from west side of Chicago to the north side of Chicago, to a park that opened in 1914 to house a Federal League team known as the Northside Park, and in 1927, it would be renamed Wrigley Field. The Cubs eventually won another pennant in 1918, but lost in the World Series to the Boston Red Sox with then-ace Babe Ruth. Then in 1929, the Cubs won another pennant with Roger Hornsby and Hack Wilson, winning 98 games to face the Philadelphia A's, ultimately losing to the A's in a 5-game series, but the Cubs make it again in 1932 to the World Series, hitting 107 wins. Playing in their 4th World Series in 7 years, they ran into a team that was running baseball at the time, the Bronx Bombers. The Yankees swept the Cubs in the World Series, and this series is best known for the infamous called shot by Babe Ruth in Game 3, where the legendary slugger allegedly called his own home run. In 1937, ivy was added to the outfield walls of Wrigley Field, as well as construction of the center field bleachers and scoreboard, both of which stand to this day, and in 1938, the Cubs eventually went to the World Series, but once again were swept by the Yankees. And now is where the term the most cursed team in sports history comes in. In 1945, the Cubs had a sub-500 season for several years, but surprisingly enough, they took the pennant in 1945, winning 98 games. They were to face the Tigers in the World Series and ended up winning 2 of the first 3 games. But during Game 4, Billy Cianis, the owner of the nearby Billy Goat Tavern, was asked to leave the game, simply because his pet goat, yes, pet goat, smelled so bad it was bothering fans. Billy ended up leaving, and while he was leaving, he was quoted with saying, "Them Cubs, they ain't ever gonna win a game no more." The Cubs went on to lose Game 4 and 5 and eventually Game 7, thus starting the Billy Goat curse, a hex that would keep the Cubs out of the World Series until 2016. 1947, the Cubs began a 20-year stretch of turmoil, never having once finished a season higher than 500 or higher than 5th place in a 10-team National League, setting a franchise record for losses in 1962 and 1966 at 59 and 103, finishing 42.5 games out of first place in 1962, only finishing above the expansion team, the New York Mets, who lost a modern-day record of 120 games. The only real highlight for the Cubs during these years was, in fact, Mr. Cub. Ernie Banks, a Texas native, made his Major League debut in 1953, who would go on to win 2 MVPs, be a 12-time All-Star, hit 512 home runs with stunning defensive play, and penultimately making the Hall of Fame, all with the Cubs throughout his career. In 1967 and 1968, the Cubs finally decided to crawl out of the basement, putting together back-to-back winning seasons for the first time since 1946. Heading into mid-August in 1969, they were 9.5 games ahead in first place. The Cubs would go on to finish the season 17 and 26. On September 9th, in a game versus the Mets at Shea Stadium, a black cat appeared on the field, which led the Cubs to lose 8 straight games. The Mets went on to win the NLCS, the first ever NLCS, mind you, but losing to the Baltimore Orioles in the World Series. This event would go down as the Black Cat Curse. And in 1984, the Cubs won 96 games, winning their first divisional crown since its inception of divisional play in the MLB. The Cubs ended their playoff drought, even winning the first 2 games of the series. But their winning ways came to an end and lost 3 straight to the San Diego Padres to one of the most remembered plays in baseball. A ground ball up the first base line going through the legs of Leo Durham as part of a 4-run 7th inning to give the Padres the advancement to the World Series. 1988 saw the Cubs play their first night game at Wrigley Field in August, after years of fighting the city of Chicago to add lights to the stadium with threats of leaving Wrigley and even the city. 1998, fast forwarding, comes and the Cubs find themselves in a playoff berth. Sammy Sosa and Kerry Wood would lead the Cubs to 90 wins, beating the Giants in a 1-game tiebreaker in a season where Sosa hit 66 home runs. The Cubs would go on to lose the NLDS to the powerhouse Atlanta Braves at the time. Now Y2K is coming on, and in 2003, the Cubs were set for another playoff berth, winning the NL Central, them besting the Braves in the NLDS for their first playoff series win since 1945. They faced the Florida Marlins in the NLCS, going up 3-1 in the first 4 games, but losing Game 5. They needed just 1 win to end the curse of the Billy Goat just to make it to the World Series. They didn't have to win the World Series, they just had to get there. But with a 3-0 lead and 2 outs to go in Game 6 at Wrigley, a man named Steve Bartman interfered with a foul ball pop-up in the left field stands, preventing the man on from catching it for the 2nd out. Castillo ended up drawing the walk, sparking an 8-run inning for the Marlins, who would win the game 8-3. Following the game, the Cubs got denied another World Series, again losing 9-6, and the curse would live on, and the Steve Bartman game would go on down in history, and he would become one of the most hated Cubs fans in history. In 2011, Theo Epstein was brought on to be the team president. Theo was a man who helped the Red Sox team that ended an 86-year drought in 2004 and winning another World Series in 2007. Beginning the rebuilding front, he wanted to start bottom to top, losing 101 games in 2012, but in 2016, the Cubs would finally have happiness in Chicago. They would go on to win 103 games, the franchise most since 1910, and they won the NL Central. They were led by John Lester, Kyle Hendricks, and defending Cy Young winner Jake Arrieta, and led on offense by Chris Bryant and Anthony Rizzo. The Cubs finished with the best record in MLB, topping the Giants in the NLDS to reach the NLCS for the 2nd straight year. And finally, after 71 years of drought, of not making the World Series whatsoever, the Cubs were finally National League champions. The curse of the Billy Goat was over, and for the first time since 1945, the Cubs had a chance. The Cubs ended up facing the Cleveland Indians in the World Series, another team who had a long championship drought since 1948, going all the way to Game 7. And as a baseball fan, this was the moment we all wanted. This is the moment we all dreamed about. 2 teams that want every ounce of the championship. 70 years of turmoil could end for one, and 108 years of being deprived of a championship for another. All in one game. It came down to just 1 game. And the Cubs went on to win that World Series, and the long-awaited drought was over. The longest championship drought in American sports history had finally ended. And that, my friends, is the reason why the Cubs are the most cursed team in sports history. This team went 108 years without a championship, 71 years without even making an appearance to have a chance, all from underlying things that were blamed on a goat, a cat, and even an individual man. Now, truly, do I believe that curses are real? Yes. As a Red Sox fan since I was a kid, I grew up knowing the curse of the Great Bambino. And for Cubs fans, I was happy that it was over after all these years. I was happy to watch that game, for sticking it through. And here's to any other team that's trying to end a drought for a championship. Anyways, guys, I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, smash the like button and be sure to comment and subscribe. Hit the noti bells so you know every single time I upload. Much love, everybody, and I will see y'all in the next one.